Good morning, Mr. Mulvaney.
Morning, Senator.
So much to talk about. I got to follow up on a couple of these, though.
Sure.
You assume I've seen lots of tricky budgets before, but this may take the cake. You assume abolishment of the so-called death tax, estate tax, but when you go to your table S3 baseline by category, you still count the revenues from the estate and gift tax, which is kind of a tricky thing. I would call that double counting. Your outside experts have assumed that your tax plan would cost $5 trillion. As somebody who spent a couple years, as you know, trying to wrestle with these numbers and took on entitlement reform, took on additional revenues, I don't think there's any way you can get there with elimination of tax expenditures, particularly when you take charitable, home mortgage, and retirement accounts off the table. There's just, there aren't enough tax deductions to get to those numbers, unless you're going to, I imagine you're now saying you're going to go ahead and dramatically cut back on the deductibility of employer-provided health care plans. That's a large number.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. Specific question I was making.
The specific question is, you got $5 trillion in cost in your tax plan,
right,
unpaid for. You cannot pay for it in any revenue-neutral basis without double or triple counting or dynamic scoring on steroids if you take charitable, home mortgage, and retirement accounts off the table is not being cut.
Right.
You can't get there. The numbers do not add up. And by the way, I don't think you've told the American public yet that to even get close, you're going to have to then take off the deductibility of employer-provided health care plans. So that's on the table?
Here's what's on the table, which is, I think, the one-page set of principles that we sent
Sir,
up to the Hill.
I've gone through these.
Ago.
I know you have as well.
Right.
I spent years going through these numbers to try to get them to balance. You got to go where the money is if you're talking about any kind of rational revenue-neutral plan. And I don't think you can get there. And I don't think your numbers add up. I think they don't pass the smell test. And I think, frankly, what Senator Whitehouse was pushing at, that you were not double counting, I just don't believe that as well, because you have put dynamic scoring in place. Dynamic scoring assumes with the tax cuts, because you can't say dynamic scoring alone is going to come about without the tax cuts in place. So if you're counting those on the dynamic scoring process, you've got to bake that in, and so it's not truly a revenue-neutral tax plan. And to get $5 trillion in savings when you take charitable, home mortgage, and retirement accounts off the table, the numbers just don't add up. Let me move to another item because my time is about up. You take non-defense discretionary spending down to 3.1% of GDP. I still got another year or two before I can say I spent longer in business than I have in government. I was a venture capitalist. I invested in a lot of businesses. I would invest in businesses based on their investments in their workforce, plant and equipment, and staying ahead of the competition. For an American tax plan and business plan, that would equate to investment in people, which is education. Plant and equipment equals infrastructure. Staying ahead of the competition in a global economy means research and development. How can you cut those so draconianly, cutting discretionary spending by $1.4 trillion over the next 10 years, cut those three areas, and assume that we're going to have all this growth you project? And I would never invest in a business that spent less than 3% of its revenue line on workforce, plant and equipment, and staying ahead of the competition. And that's what you're saying the American business plan ought to be.
No, I'm not, sir. And I would suggest to you that you would also never invest in a business whose revenues were growing dramatically fast. Their expenses were growing dramatically faster than the revenues, which is what we've seen here.
Amen to that. So let's deal with both sides, both the spending
and
and
your capital investment. I think you're looking at only one part of the equation when you look at the American business plan, because we agree with you that capital investment is absolutely critical. In fact, you cannot get 3% growth without having dramatic increases in capital investment. We just simply think that private capital investment is a more efficient and effective way to get there. In fact, history proves that, than government capital investment. So what we do is, in our tax plan, try to promote the type of capital investment that you are looking for. We're moving it out of government capital investment, which we think is woefully inefficient, and into the private market capital investment.
All
that we
I
think
would
is
say,
what gets us to 3%.
all I would say, Mr. Mulvaney, is that, you know, for the most part in our country, education, infrastructure, and core basic research and development still remain a government function. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.